Welcome to the morning show. We're coming to you today on WJOP-LP Newburyport at FM 96.3 on Channel 9 and on Newburyport Community Media's YouTube channel at ncmhub.org. I'm your host, Mary Jacobsen, and today I'm very happy to welcome back to the show Dave Fortier. Dave is a survivor of the 2013 Boston Marathon bombings, an experience which led him to found One World Strong Foundation, where he serves as president. He's also a Plum Island resident. Dave was on the show a couple of years ago to talk about the founding of One World Strong and their mission. And today he's going to talk about the evolution of where and with whom and how the foundation works today. So Dave, first and foremost, thank you so much for taking time to come to the morning show and share your knowledge.
Mary, anytime. Thank you for having me back. It's nice to be back here.
It's my pleasure and my privilege, Dave. You know, Dave, it's been a while since you've been on the show to talk about the origins of One World Strong. And I hope that perhaps you wouldn't mind starting by just refreshing our memories about your experience as a survivor of a domestic terror attack and how that led you to begin One World Strong and what its original mission was.
Yeah. It all started in Boston after the marathon bombings. Myself and many other people were visited by veterans of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars by an organization called Semper Fi and America's Fund. And at first it seemed like a simple meeting, but Mayor Menino at the time did a wonderful job bringing the community together, the community that was impacted in Boston. And I would constantly hear stories of, when did you know you'd be okay? And I would continuously hear when I was visited by so-and-so from the fund or Semper Fi or Semper Fi and America's Fund, which are all the same thing. But, and I had the same thing. A gentleman that I work with, actually local to this area, absolutely fantastic. And it made a difference for me and my family. And I started to hear all these other stories of peer-to-peer. So it really started to resonate. And it was for myself and many others. We'd hear these things. But then what really kind of escalated or moved to be One World, the Pulse nightclub shooting.
Oh, yes.
My phone lit up like a Christmas tree. It was people in Boston that wanted to go there and help, like veterans came and helped us. And several of us worked really hard to figure out how to get 10 people from Boston to Orlando, to the hospital, and to connect with people. And I remember 3 days before we were going down, I received a call from the FBI, folks that we worked with, victims assistance folks that we work with at the FBI. And these are all people that were connected to us after the bombing to make sure we had the services that we needed. And they called to say, we tried this peer-to-peer thing. It didn't really work that well. And I think, Mary, I laid awake for 3 days thinking to myself, oh my God, what are we doing? But we had a fantastic crew that went down. And 3 days later, I remember coming back after meeting all these different people and seeing these same relationships form in Orlando that we saw form back in Boston.
Wow, Dave.
Just that peer-to-peer, that connection piece with somebody who's been through a similar form of trauma. And it was that event. I remember leaving there thinking, I want to volunteer my time to an organization that does this. I had my own business, doing my own thing here in town. And it was another event that then in 2017, it was actually a bombing in Mogadishu, Somalia. That bombing killed 600 people. Most people don't even know that it happened, or it hit the news so quickly that everybody's forgotten about it. But knowing that it was a bombing, knowing what the injuries would be, in many parts of the world, you're lucky to get patched up correctly, forget what happens next. The psychosocial piece, the healing that comes after that, right? And that's the piece that, for us, really crystallized it to say, okay, we've looked for an organization that does this. We can't find it. That peer-to-peer, just people helping people. Right? Can't find it. So in 2018, we formed One World Strong as a foundation. I've said this, say this when I speak at events. I should have read Nonprofits for Dummies and did not. Still haven't read it. but
you could probably write one now.
But we've got some really good people that work with us. I can't stress enough the fantastic amount of people that we have that work with this organization now and since 2018. So it's really come a long way.
Dave, I'm curious to find out now. It's inspiring to just learn how many people just started to reach out to you, both to help you deal and not feel isolated or alone, but to feel like you were part of a community that became visible to you after you involuntarily joined it. But how wonderful to know that there was a community there that was interested in reaching out to you. And and your own experience speaks to the power of that one-on-one connection of somebody who's been through something similar to what you have and can anticipate what you're feeling and know how important and helpful it will be to you to have somebody reach out to you. And I'm curious to find out, when the Pulse nightclub event happened and you said people were calling you, were these people who had experienced some kind of violence, or were they just people who heard about it, felt terrible about it, and wanted to help, but they hadn't themselves had an experience of trauma?
These were people in Boston that were involved directly in the bombing.
Yeah,
so
interesting.
they had injuries.
Okay.
Everything from shrapnel to hearing loss to limb loss. Wanted to go.
So
and
they'd
help.
had experiences similar to yours, and that resonated with them.
Yeah.
And it's inspiring, to hear about that. I remember there's famously Mr. Rogers said after 9/11, and people saw him as a wise person, and so they went to him to say, how do we deal with this? How do we think about it? And he said, look to the helpers. And I've always remembered that.
Yeah.
So look to the helpers is like your operating principle.
and that's it, right? We did this. Most everybody that's involved, obviously we have some people they're skilled with mental health services, right?
Yeah.
Some of us just ended up there.
Yeah.
And we don't pretend to be doctors. We don't pretend to be therapists. We're just people. But that can be a huge piece of the healing process.
Absolutely.
Is simply people helping people.
Right.
It's not the answer, right? It's not the only thing. It's a piece of a puzzle.
Yeah.
And it's what we saw that was missing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the part. But it was all boils back to Semper Fi and America's Fund having come to Boston. Otherwise, probably would have never seen it.
Well, it's a chain link, isn't it?
It's interesting to think back. Sometimes during my long flights, I get preoccupied with, okay, how did I end up on this flight?
What did I do?
Or I'm sitting in an airport somewhere waiting for 5 hours for my next flight. But it all really boils back to Boston and the response of Boston, from Semper Fi and America's Fund to the One Fund to the mayor to all the people that were involved. There are so many people, Mary.
Right.
I would never even attempt to get into the names, but they all know who they are.
It takes a global village to deal with the violence and trauma of the world that we live in, and you're part of that, and you started a branch on that evolutionary tree. And actually, the evolutionary tree of One World Strong is what I was interested in talking to you about. And thank you for that fascinating and inspiring
the roots are getting
kind
deeper.
of review. And there's more branches because the world is as it is. So I did want to ask you if you could talk to us about how One World has expanded and evolved over the last few years to meet changing needs, both domestically and globally.
Yeah, sure. It's one of the biggest challenges we faced immediately was we didn't want One World to be just a U.S.-based entity, right? It needed to be global. The challenges are global, right? You can't. It's very hard to just operate here and say we're only going to do something here. I mean, you could, but it wasn't not who I am and not what others were.
Yeah.
But opening that door, you open it to not speaking language, the local language, customs. The different things that people do and how they operate. We work in different parts of Africa now where there's a lot of customs that we have to become familiar with. That some things that are acceptable here are not acceptable there.
Interesting, Dave.
And it's what really played a role was our U.S. State Department and some of the people that we've been able to meet there over the last few years. They've opened up so many doors into our embassies. And some of the folks that we've been able to meet are just absolutely amazing. They are committed government folks to being a Foreign Service officer and doing the work locally. I mean, just every time I have a chance to meet some of these people, their stories are amazing, and they just truly want to make a difference. Part of that is helping us get connected in communities. So between that there's an organization called World Boston, which we should probably have you speak to at some point. They've been fantastic about connecting us with people as they come through Boston from different countries that are part of State Department programs. And we've been able to meet so many people that way, so that when something happens in a place like Uganda, we actually know people that we can contact there and get us connected locally. Same with places like Somalia or Kenya, places in the Middle East, places in Europe. And that's a lot of what led us to some of the recent stuff with Ukraine.
Yeah. Well, I imagine that having that powerful local network around the globe enables you then to respond very quickly, much more quickly than you could if each time something happened in an ad hoc way, you had to kind of reach out and try and find local people who could help guide your own responses. So I take it a lot of what's been happening over the last few years is that your reach has expanded. With a lot of help from other kind of committed and devoted players, including the people in the communities that you're reaching out to, and also the State Department foreign officers who have been very helpful, it sounds as though, in enabling you to tap their network to reach local resources. Now, I'm curious to find out, Dave, if you could maybe give us an example then of, you mentioned some of the, of course there are language barriers, but cultural barriers as well. I imagine a lot of the one-on-one connection, because people are people and emotions are emotions, and that peer support network. And, well, I could be wrong about that. Maybe it's different. I was just going to say. So, that emotional connection and how you form that might be the same, but I could realize now, why do I assume that? So could you give an example of some of the cultural differences?
Sure, needs are different in different places.
Yeah.
Right. So I'll come back to in Greater Manchester in England. I'll come back to that in a second. But what ties to it is I think of something recently that happened in Uganda. Just culturally, they needed farming. They needed animals to help support their community. Yeah. So we actually participated in helping them with goats, with a herd. But there it was huge. It made a huge difference to have the things that the community needed that were stolen from them.
Okay.
And this is something that we were able to do, which you wouldn't probably do, say, in France or in England or in Ukraine where we work. It's not the same thing, and that's something that we've had to learn. And we're not Foreign Service officers. We're not, and we don't pretend to be. But we're able to learn from people, and I think that's the big thing about this. Is there's not a day that goes by that I don't learn something new about some spot somewhere in the world, and it all has to do with this network that's been developed.
That is remarkable. I can well imagine that when you started One World Strong, being able to restock a flock of goats was probably not something you ever would have visualized. And yet, with the global network that you have now, you're coming across what people actually need in their communities can be very different from what we might imagine. If your goats are your livelihood, and also the way you live, your custom, then being able to restock your flock of goats is critical, not just to livelihood, but to making people whole again.
Right. And there's places we can't be on the ground, right? There's it's just not safe to be. And even connecting, we utilize technology. Right? We utilize where we can. And there's things like Zoom and Teams and all those different things that we all got accustomed to do during COVID. We were using some of those before COVID hit. And so it actually accelerated it for us because other people then started to use it. The branches even grew for us during COVID, or during kind of the lockdown period, when nobody was really traveling or you couldn't get places. And we saw just huge growth in what we do. It really was. The tie back to England to that, though, is there was a bombing in England, Ariana Grande bombing. You may remember. Yeah,
I do. I'd forgotten about it, but I do remember it now that you mentioned it.
But there's so many of these things.
There's so many, they tend to fade.
Mary, I have lists and we have a database of all. It is, when you look at this globally, when you look at terrorism, extremism, mass casualty events, forget war for a second, the numbers are huge. There's not a day that passes that something doesn't happen somewhere, sadly. But a specific event that led to more branches and kind of the trunk of what we do getting bigger was a relationship that formed after the Ariana Grande bombings with the city of Greater Manchester, and in particular their mayor and a lot of his people. He's a gentleman that actually brought some of the families that had lost children at that event, brought them to Boston. Back in 2019, I think it was, and participated in the Boston Marathon.
Oh wow!
With us, very quietly, not a
yeah.
But it's part of that peer-to-peer of bringing people together.
Right.
We do it in different ways. This was folks coming to see us in Boston, and a lot of times we go there. But some of those people have gone on to visit New Zealand, to visit other places where these events happen. And it's not just me. It's not just people here. It's a global network now of, I think, probably close to 45 people that are willing to pack a bag and connect with others.
Yeah.
So everything from Pittsburgh with the synagogue to the mosque in Quebec City to a bombing at a concert to children being taken from cities in Africa.
Yeah.
It runs a huge gamut, but it's those relationships that form in some of these cities that have really helped us make a difference, and one of those is Greater Manchester and the mayor there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just and then also the mayor of Liverpool. So two of the bigger cities in England we've become very connected to over time. Mayors talk. Between countries, we've been able to grow our network that way as well, and just incredibly grateful for these relationships that have formed. Truly some amazing people.
But I imagine that they're really grateful to be part of a global community themselves, because that kind of isolation that an individual can feel is also something a city or a location or a community can feel when unexpected violence strikes. And so to be able to feel like we're part of the world, there are people all over the planet that have been through not exactly what we went through, but something that impacted them in similar ways, and we can actually meet them and talk to them, and we can go there and feel the rich emotional connection that develops. So that's very powerful, Dave.
Yeah,
so One World Strong has been very busy.
Yes, it is. It's I've never questioned doing what we do. Sometimes I question my sanity on a regular basis, but what we do on that peer-to-peer piece has played a huge role and an impact in communities. You've actually spoken to some of the people that, from Parkland to here in Boston with Parents for Peace, Make Our Schools Safe.
Thanks to your connecting me with.
That's just a small piece. The number of organizations that we've been connected to, Mary, it's numbers in the hundreds now of folks globally that will either they've become a part of something or are starting something or need help starting something. We're not the need help starting something, but we can help people find that.
And that's, what's the phrase, a force multiplier, to be able to take these amazing organizations that are doing great things and then to be able to find the connections and link them together. That just enhances the effectiveness for everybody, and also the sense that we're in this together.
Right. And a lot of it, Mary, boils down to, for me, I didn't realize this when we started this, but we can play a role in prevention. Survivors can actually play a role in preventing things from happening. That became really kind of another root system to this that supports it. Survivors then have a voice in prevention, not only through starting something, but just sharing their story.
Absolutely.
A survivor's story can change the trajectory of maybe somebody who's thinking of doing something, because they don't necessarily realize the impact of what they're doing at the time.
Right.
Now, some do, but many don't.
Yeah.
And if you can see the impact that it has to that person, that family, that community, somebody might think different, or maybe take the time to find some help. Or, in the case of Boston, right? You've got an older brother that was clearly radicalized, a younger brother that was
a follower. Yeah.
Right? Could there have been something, whether the school that he was in, people that knew him, could there have been something that changed that trajectory?
Yeah.
We'll never know. But that's what organizations like Parents for Peace, Make Our Schools Safe, others that are out there want to then reach out and do. We want to give them a platform
Right.
to do that.
Which is so important, and they probably have prevented things, many things
We'll never know.
already.
Yeah.
That's the challenge. One of the challenges is having faith.
Yeah.
That telling stories and providing those narratives with the hope that you'll open up some empathic part of somebody's brain that hasn't quite developed yet or needs to
Right.
wake up, and they think twice.
Think twice.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or somebody can see something, right, and say, okay,
Right.
boy, maybe there's a way to get connected.
Yeah.
And that connection piece is something that we saw that needed to be more visible.
Yeah.
And easier to do.
Yeah.
Right? You know, you've heard me speak of algorithms. You know, a lot of people don't want to go online and search for something because that search creates an
pathway.
algorithm.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, there's a reason
Yeah.
that Home Depot is now sending you something when you're looking for
Right.
a home. You know,
Right.
there's reasons for that. You know,
That's
Google's
right.
free, Facebook is free, Instagram is free. All those things are free for a reason.
Right.
You're paying for it with your thoughts
That's
and whatever
right.
you type in.
And your personal information. And
Right.
Yeah. Well, Dave, I know that you traveled to Ukraine, I think more than once.
5 times.
5 times.
About to go 6, yeah.
Yeah, and so I did want to talk about your experiences there because I know it's had an impact on you, and it's also developed a new direction in terms of health issues and medical issues. So could you talk to us about what you learned from your trips in Ukraine about how the ongoing war there has had an impact, as you've said to me in a conversation we had, I think, just before your might not be your most recent trip, but in December.
Been a couple since then.
It's not all about guns and ammo. It's a lot more than that. So help us understand what you've learned from your travels to Ukraine and the people that you've met there.
Yeah, I mean, we could do a couple shows just on this, Mary, but the people are some of the most resilient people I've met anywhere in the world. Resilience is not their thing. If you know the history or if folks look into the history of Ukraine, resilience is not theirs. These are some very resilient people.
Yeah.
What we hear about here a lot is the cost of war,
Yes.
right? You know, we've held up bills to
Yeah.
get them resources that they need, right? People paid for that with their lives.
Yep.
And it's not just one person or two, it's entire communities. And so let me back up a second to the mayor of Greater Manchester. So back to the Ariana Grande bombing. These are the
Yeah.
connections to this to tie it together. We were together speaking at an event in Oslo last spring, and we took some time to get together to talk. The mayor had just met the mayor from Lviv, Ukraine. They met passing in the airport. They talked for 15 minutes in typical Andy fashion. Andy's the mayor of Greater Manchester. He asked the mayor of Lviv, what are your biggest challenges? Right? Mental health services, the need for prosthetics, the need for medical care.
Yeah.
So I'll boil this down to kind of, Andy said, I've got a bald guy in Boston you need to talk to. So
I'm sure he didn't.
he might have.
That's who he is, huh?
But so I was connected to the mayor of Lviv, and you know, we had some conversations involved with him and some of his people about the needs, and we learned very quickly how big this was.
Yeah.
We're talking thousands. We're used to dealing here in dozens, maybe, right,
Yeah.
or even hundreds. But now we're talking thousands of people impacted
Yeah.
on pretty much a daily basis.
Yeah.
Right. So Lviv is in the western part of the country. So a lot of people that were injured come there for services. And what we were amazed to find is the amount of need that people have, right? It's, yes, we hear about the war, we hear about bombs, we hear about
Yes.
drones, we hear about bullets, we hear about, but it's the people that it impacts.
We hear about the number of fatalities or injuries, but not necessarily the follow-up, the trauma, and just the injuries.
Mary, it was, I think this story was in July or August of last year that I saw the Wall Street Journal article came out, and it struck me because they were talking about the number of amputations in Ukraine, and they gave a number between 20 and 50,000
Oh my
amputations.
Wow.
People with amputations,
Yes,
so that's
yeah.
one or more.
Wow.
20 to 50,000 people. just knowing what happened in Boston with everybody who suffered limb loss there, and the amount of surgeries that some of these people have been through in Boston, some number in 70 plus operations. It's not just one thing. A lot of people have a thinking that, okay, well, you go in, you have a leg replaced, and that's not how it works. There's so much more to it. And when I heard that number, it was, okay, that doesn't, and that's when more phone calls started to happen. We were doing a lot more back and forth in the summer of last year with Ukraine, and then it became, okay, I need to get there.
Yeah.
And so I went there and spent a week and really learned firsthand in the hospitals, meeting people, seeing what was happening, the need for antibiotics, the need for, some, in Boston, as an example, we had some of the best care in the world, right, in hospitals. My injuries were shrapnel and minor. But there, you could have a shrapnel injury, not have the antibiotics, and end up losing a limb.
Oh, which you otherwise, if you had been able to ward off the infection, you wouldn't have had to lose the limb.
Correct.
That's just tragic.
So those are the things that we were learning about things that are needed in the country, and a lot of it has gotten better. There's still a huge need for antibiotics there, but we hear about guns and bullets and drones, right? We don't hear about what's happening kind of on the back side of this, and there are so many stories there. We actually, I don't know if I told you, we actually had a family come over to Boston from Ukraine for the marathon. They spent a week with us here. It's actually, so on my first trip over, we were coming back from the hospital and headed back to town, and the gentleman that I was with said, I want to just make a quick stop. There's a family that we'll go visit. They have a problem with their antenna on their TV, so we stopped at their apartment. They didn't speak English, but the gentleman I was with was able to translate. But as we walked in, I noticed these little tiny pair of running blades in the corner, and I asked the question, and it was a little girl. Her brother, twin brother, and her mom were in a train station leaving the front line area when it was hit by a missile, 2 missiles actually, I believe. So there were approximately 60 people killed. She lost both her legs. Oh gosh. At 10. Her brother witnessed all of this and also witnessed his mother losing a leg, as well as everything that happened around him. And hearing that story, seeing the legs, the prosthetic legs, the running legs, it was okay. With One World, we formed it. We use movement to heal. That's always a big way. Many of us in Boston were able to move forward. We use it everywhere in the world now. And I asked the question: would the family be interested in coming to Boston? Maybe she would like to run the 5K event. Wow. But we had a very generous donor that took care of all of it.
Wonderful.
So
that's great.
So we had a family come over, an interpreter, a trainer. So we had 5 people come and spend a week in Boston. And if some of your listeners know, it's not inexpensive to stay in Boston.
No.
Marathon or visit it.
Nothing is inexpensive.
But we were able to do that, and they were able to meet other people that have been through some similar events. They were able to participate. But the young girl's name is Yana, and she trained all winter. And then started and finished the 5K event. There's actually a documentary that's being done, she's a part of, that her story will be a part of it, and Boston is actually featured in it. So
well, you have to keep us posted when it
I'll let you know. It's a
That's
fantastic
a
story, but that's one of thousands, is my point.
Yeah.
It's not a dozen families that have been impacted. It is literally thousands. And the number now, I checked this morning, and it's only an estimate because numbers aren't really given out, but there are over 90,000 people in Ukraine have one or more limb that's been.
Oh, it's so sad, Dave.
And that's just limbs. That's not people with shrapnel. That's not
or head
loss
injuries,
of head injuries or
so
loss
many
of life.
things. Or just loss of life, and then everyone that you knew, your whole family is impacted by that.
The impact is huge. So we've started on our website. We put together. I think we made. If I've not run out of your time this morning,
we have a little more time.
But what we were able to put together is kind of the needs of the city, and those needs evolve every day. Between what they're looking for, what they can, So along the lines of people helping people, peer to peer, we're also now working with cities.
Yeah, that's the Unbroken Cities Network.
Correct.
That you told me about, which is a great name.
It's Unbroken is actually the name in Ukraine that they use for their local organization that helps with veterans as well as civilians, and so we formed a coalition of organizations. You can't just do these things by yourself. Back in the late fall last year, we were in Krakow in Poland. So between the mayor of Greater Manchester, the mayor of Liverpool, the mayor of Lviv, the founder of Semper Fi and America's Fund, which goes back to how all this started, and One World formed an organization called Unbroken Cities. And these are cities helping cities, kind of peer-to-peer cities. So the city of Lviv needs these things. We, over the last several months, have been trying to help them find those things. The Semper Fi and America's Fund has been fantastic with mental health services and equipment. And where I was last week was with somebody who was donating bionic prosthetics that can be refit.
Which is so great, which is so wonderful. It speaks to the power of the network of the helpers.
And this was a call that we received inbound. It was kind of late at night. I knew who was calling me, so I picked up, and she said, I've got a friend, and she's got this, and can you use these? And I thought, well, I think we can. So I called the folks in Lviv that we work with. They actually just had been donated to them the funds to build a prosthetic manufacturing facility. But even the facility itself can only do 1,000 limbs a year. That seems like a lot.
It does, but not when you have 90,000 people, who are missing one or more limbs.
Correct. And you need refittings, and you need all these different things.
Yeah.
So to have something like this, they said absolutely. So we zipped over last week. We were able to pick them up, meet the donor, fantastic person. The person that connected us is fantastic. It's just there's such a wonderful group of people out there that are looking for ways to help. We're trying to make those ways that they can help more accessible.
Well, Dave, I'm sure that when you started One World Strong, not only could you not have anticipated resupplying goats, but how vast, really, and how deep and how profoundly important your act of founding this organization and the way that it is spread and engaged with people all over the globe who are doing different aspects of healing and repair. It's just wonderful and very inspiring, and I thank you for starting the organization and for making it evolve and grow in such interesting and impactful ways. It's really extraordinary, incredible, and personally very, very inspiring. As we've been talking now about the need for prosthetic limbs, and I've just been thinking about there's a quotation: "Strong at the broken place. We go strong at the broken places," and of course, bones do that. They get stronger at the broken places, and I think all of the network of helpers and people like yourself who have been impacted by domestic terror or other kinds of violence and trauma, you're living testimony to becoming stronger at the broken places, which is an amazing thing to hear about and to witness. So thank you for all that, Dave. It's a remarkable story. And one final question for you then is, how can people who might be hearing this, how can they aid or work with you?
Sure. You can reach out and contact me personally to Dave.Fortier at oneworldstrong.org, contact at oneworldstrong.org, our website, oneworldstrong.org. We're constantly evolving the website to include what Unbroken Cities needs. And the Unbroken City that we're working with right now and other cities are helping is Lviv in Ukraine. It's a major city. I think it's the third largest city in the country. But it's cities like that and others that need things, Lviv can actually get things from there to other cities in Ukraine as well.
Yeah.
Some of the cities that we visited there are in need of many other things. So it's coordinating that effort there right now. But we have just a fantastic team of people. Mary, I think I've talked to you about this in the past, but the person that headed up the Newtown Resilience Center in Connecticut after Sandy Hook, she's a part of our team. There are things that we're doing each day that I could not do without having folks like that.
Yeah.
We have a team in Kosovo that helps us with all the tech work that we do. The Homeland Security with what we do with them, the State Department with what we do, mayors in different cities around this country and others. Just an incredible group of people that
There's a
want to reach out and help.
powerful network that you have.
Really is
Doing
fantastic.
Incredibly good things. So we live in difficult times. We were talking before we started about we live in interesting times and how, for what it's worth. But always, Mr. Rogers is right. Look to the helpers, and you'll see a lot of amazing people doing amazing, impactful things for the betterment of our individual lives, our communities, and our world. Thank you very much, Dave, for visiting the morning show to share this with me. I have the feeling you'll be back before too long.
Thanks, Mary. Anytime. Absolutely anytime.
That's it for today, everybody. Please join us again next Thursday at 9 for the morning show. Till then, everybody, be well.